Hello, 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 coaches and leaders. I am so excited. I have a colleague and friend, Sean Lindsey's on with me. We have known each other since you were a student teacher.
Yeah, an awful long time.
Oh, it's a long time. I love this so much. And so Sean has like kind of just really expanded professionally and now works with school districts with a company called Reading Horizons to roll out reading curriculum. And so today we're going to talk about how he does that and my own thoughts about how we can roll out curriculum. And I know most of you listening today do this exact thing. So first, I wanted to welcome you to the show, Sean.
Hi, Becca. How are you? Thank you for having me on. I'm really excited that we get to have this conversation today.
Me too. I know something about you and me is we have awesome conversations off podcast. And
That's
so I'm
right.
excited to like have folks listen in, right? To the things that we
Yeah.
talk about and the ideas that we have. And I know something about you is when I talk to you, I expand and I learn more. And so I'm excited to talk about this today. I'd love you to
Um,
share with everyone what's been your educational and leadership journey? Where did you start? Where did you end up now?
yeah. Great question. So I'll tell you where I am now, and then I'll tell you kind of how I got there.
Oh, I love that.
Currently, I am the Director of Education Solutions at Reading Horizons. That's a fancy title, but it just means that I get to lead this national team of subject matter experts. These are previous sped directors, school administrators, instructional coaches. These are people who are really like fabulously like thought leaders in the space of literacy, and they get to work with school districts in applying what we know to be those best practices of literacy instruction, right? Um, I I joined them as a previous education teacher, like a elementary school teacher. So I was a fourth grade teacher right out of the gate. I knew I wanted to be in elementary education by my second semester in college. I was so actually, I'll tell you this funny story. I started off thinking I was going to be a high school teacher, high school Spanish.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. And I went in, I'm so blessed that we got to do called practicums. We got to do these
Mhm.
practicums very early on.
Mhm.
And I went into a high school and I was just like, man, I am not feeling this. I'm sitting on the floor of my advisor's office one day. I'm telling her how much I'm kind of like bummed about this. And I'm playing with what I didn't know at the time were these math manipulatives. And I'm just like playing with these math manipulatives that we use in elementary school daily as instructional tools. And I'm just like, man, I hate high school. This is not fun. And she's like, well, why don't you try elementary? And like, it from there, it just, I mean, it was the rest was history. So started out as a fourth grade teacher, became, a part of opportunity culture. I got to be a school leader and then a district leader building like systems that supported beginning teachers and residency teachers in CMS. That's Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools for those of you not in North Carolina. And then from there, I transitioned over to UNC Charlotte, where I got to be an instructional coach for the North Carolina New Teacher Support Program. So I had a caseload, a cohort of about four or five different charter schools in the greater charter, like Charlotte area, where I got to lead out on beginning teacher program work and instructional coaching, and really hone my skills of supporting school leaders and teachers in making like these transformational learning experiences. So that's how I ended up where I am now, where I've got a master's degree in K-12 literacy, and I'm passionate about two things: teachers, supporting teachers, making sure that they have what they need, and this idea of literacy and literacy being opportunity, literacy being a civil right. So those are my two big passions, and I'm excited to talk to you about them today.
I love that. Oh, I love what you stand for and that you're connected to your commitment and why you do what you do. It's
That's
awesome.
right.
All right, so we're going to talk about change, right? Essentially, what this is kind of change management, right? In the
Yeah.
organizational world. Um, so what you do is or part of what you do, I think, is you go into districts and you help them. So you work with Reading Horizons and you say, hey, right? you've purchased the Reading Horizons curriculum, right?
Mhm.
And then you work with the district leaders to roll that out, right? In other words, like we're
Yeah.
going to have buy-in from, and we're
Right.
calling it buy-in. Very, you and I have talked about buy-in, right? And
Yeah.
it is it if teachers, if all stakeholders were not at the table to decide to choose this curriculum, it is buy-in, right?
Yeah.
Um, so you work with them to have leaders, school leaders and teachers kind of buy in and utilize this resource. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think it's actually probably more accurate, Becca, if we take a step back and talk about what happens before the implementation. Because,
Ooh,
and we talked about this before,
that's
like
right.
Paul
That's right. There's
Ramrich
a rubric.
Santorio says, like, yeah, well, you don't just like, you don't build buy-in. You have to like create it. You have to create it from the ground floor. So it's like, how do you create buy-in ahead of time? How do you work with school leaders to help them to see like what are the things that we care about in a curriculum before we even select it? What do we believe? Um, is it okay if we
Oh,
start
I would
there
love
before we
to. Yeah,
even
yes. I forgot like the amazing beforehand process that you have, and that was like one of the things that really intrigued me, and I wanted to talk with you about it. So yes, thank you for saying.
yeah.
Let's start from the very beginning.
Because I think a lot of people they might be in this position now where some of your listeners might be saying, well, but we haven't even bought a new curriculum yet. We might be looking for one. What are some things that we could do or right could explore to help to determine what are the things that we care about? I'm gonna steal from a few people that I've talked to. So Dr. Stephanie Steffen in Rockwood, Missouri, she created with and alongside these teachers, teacher leaders, school leaders, these like belief statements. Like, what do we believe that our students should be, what do we believe our students should have access to? What do we believe that our students should be able to do? And they use that to sort of to drive the rubrics that they create to determine the curriculums that they choose. Um, Same with Lakeisha Brown in Northampton County Schools in North Carolina. Like they came together with all of these teachers, teacher leaders, school leaders, and said, what do we want in a curriculum? We're not just going to look at, and there's these fabulous, implementation. There's these rubrics like ed reports out there who tell you what are these evidence-based best practices, and they have vetted these curriculums, but like you would actually be surprised. Your teachers, but your teacher, they have that knowledge of what they need and they know what their students need. And that's a way that you're creating buy-in. You're not just saying, hey, all these other people who don't know our scholars, quote unquote, um, said that this would be good for our scholars. We also believe that these things would be good for our scholars.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on an
Oh,
approach
I
like
love
that?
that. I love that it starts with belief systems, right? Like what
Mm,
do we the because that is beliefs create actions, right? Oh, I have so many thoughts about that actually. And thinking about even like motivation, right? If we actually start with belief, that is intrinsic motivation, right? If I am motivated by my beliefs, that's internal
uh,
versus if I'm motivated by rewards and punishments, like, oh, I'll get marked down on my evaluation. That's an external
mm.
motivation, right? And we know when we have internally motivated uh teachers, right? Like leaders, like we have magic happens, right? We can
Yeah,
exceed anything that we've even considered possible. So I do love that it starts with that internal belief system.
yeah. I love that. I love what you said about belief. Like it's an internal motivator.
Yeah,
That's so cool.
yeah. And it gives our actions. If you want to know someone's
Right.
beliefs, look at their actions.
That's right. That's right. And then the beliefs, I guess, then would drive the actions
Yep,
of their curriculum decisions. And
yep, exactly.
I think it's good. It's almost table stakes at this point for us to assume that if we're bringing on a new curriculum, that it should be vetted externally. Like we should be looking at people that like we should be listening to ourselves, but we should also like validate that um, through these third party programs or third party evaluators too, who do this for a living. Like, I mean, the Reading League is another example. Like they evaluate curriculum for effectiveness. So I think
Yeah.
it's good to look at that. But I think let's transition over to what do we do whenever we have brought on a new curriculum?
hmm
Have
Yeah.
you?
Well,
Um,
before you do, you talked about a rubric. And
mm,
I want you
yeah,
to expand on that, right?
yeah,
Because I thought that was brilliant that there's a rubric that's created from these belief statements that were created. And I love this.
right.
Can you just expand a little bit more on these rubrics that are created to evaluate curriculum?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a few things that would show up on that rubric. Like we want our students, or we believe our students should be reading rigorous text. So those are some of the things that would show up. They're looking for that. We believe that our students should have opportunities to have academic conversations with each other. So they're looking through the teacher script to see, like, is it scripted for students to have opportunities to talk to each other?
Mhm.
We believe that students should have access to tier two and tier three vocabulary. Are they doing that? So those were, and these are things that may or may not show up on other systems. They may not show up on, these other evaluators, but these are important to the teachers who know their students the best.
Mhm.
And so it was really fun to see the list of things that Northampton County Schools in North Carolina believes and wants to see in their kids and in their scholars, and to see like, as a curriculum, what are ways that we're showing up for those like for those teachers already? But then I think it's a really cool way on the back end for them to say, okay, maybe no curriculum has it all, but where are the ways in which we know ahead of time we're going to have to supplement? Which is a really it's a cool conversation to have before we even purchase the curriculum, before they
Yeah,
have the curriculum in their hands and they're finding out, oh man, this really doesn't have the things that I really wanted in it. So,
right.
and I'm sure that they have these conversations with, these are instructional coaches. They're having these conversations with their teachers at their PLC meetings. They're elevating the concerns and desires of the teachers.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's I think it's a fantastic approach on the front end to make sure that we're creating buy-in from the ground floor.
And I would actually assert if there are stakeholders at the table to make this decision, especially with a rubric that was kind of ground
Mhm.
up created, that we're actually this is more than buy-in.
Yeah,
This is something around engagement, ownership level,
yeah.
right? And if folks are listening to this and you're like, what is there's a continuum. There's a teacher engagement continuum. Check out that episode.
Yeah,
But
buy-in is not the end goal, is what
yeah, but yeah,
I've
buy-in is
learned from
not.
you.
It's like the minimum. It is like the
Yeah.
lowest
Hmm.
thing we want to be, kind of aiming for. So okay, good. So this is exciting. All right. So now what happens?
Yeah. And two, it even to speak back to what you were saying, like teachers should be engaging in model lessons like prior
Mhm.
to, like,
Yeah.
what does this curriculum actually look like when I'm teaching it
hmm hmm
with a high level of integrity. They
Yeah.
should, I mean, not just looking at a book and looking and flipping through pages.
Right.
What does it look like in the classroom,
hmm
with real students or with teachers? So
hmm
those are cool.
Yeah.
Um, ooh, what we haven't talked about. We didn't talk about this before. What's been your experience with like with pilots as a part of like a larger or greater adoption strategy?
I love that. Actually, I see that the most often as rolling out a new curriculum. I very much believe in the change adoption curve as a model for change. There's lots of models for change. I'm very much of the belief there's no one right way to do things. So
Right.
we have one of my favorite change models is the change adoption curve, where you start out with I think they're called the innovators, right? This small group of committed people that want to adopt this change. And then it spreads from there and increases to I think it's the early adopters.
Yeah.
Or there's some group before the early adopters, or the early majority maybe. So it's early adopters and there's early
And then the
majority.
early majority. And then you have your
Yeah,
laggards.
then you have late majority. So there's a big,
That's right.
big, yeah. And then the laggards, which I do not like that term. I call them the
Mm,
latest adopters. Oh
I
my
like
God, you're
that.
just the latest adopters.
That's a good positive spin. I know that
Yeah.
about you. That's a good positive spin. I'll take that.
Yeah, but it's this idea that you actually pilots are or piloting curriculum, I think supports this model.
Hmm.
Where you have this committed group and then they start to share. And they don't share, they're sharing with everyone, but the goal isn't that this small committed group apply or tries this new curriculum and then everyone adopts it. I think that's a
Right.
big mistake. We don't expect
Mm,
everyone to adopt immediately. That there's a slightly bigger group that they
yeah.
influence,
Yeah.
right? And then there's
They,
momentum that gets caused. So I'm curious about you, like what
yeah.
do you know, and you're implementing these new curriculum. Do you have pilot teachers or pilot group?
Yeah. We don't call them pilots. We choose a different term. I think pilots can sometimes get a bad rep. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
people hear the word pilot and they think, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
we're just trying it out. We're just testing it out. We're not actually, this isn't a part of a larger adoption strategy." And I think changing the language and calling it a phased implementation, or even like, put a number, phase one implementation,
Mm-hmm.
it
Ooh.
creates in your mind like this is the first phase, and then we're
Mm-hmm.
moving to the next phase of your implementation. It actually like
Mm-hmm.
really aligns with what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few things that I think that pilots or phase implementations do well. Like it does help them to, in a way, mitigate their risk. Like you're not adopting everything at one time and trying to figure it out at one time. It does do exactly what you said too. It helps to create those teacher leaders and leverage those teacher leaders or like those early adopters, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
to sort of champion it for their peers.
Mm-hmm.
I think it does another thing too for like a greater adoption strategy. I talk to districts a lot about this. No curriculum out of the box is going to be perfect
Mm-hmm.
for your students, for your education system, the instructional initiatives that you have in your school. You're going to have to switch it around a little bit. So those early adopters, those can be some of those ones who say, you know what, we might have to plop this part out, put this part in. We may need to add a little bit of extra time to our instructional block. And these are people who are already going to be creating, I'm putting in quotation marks, they're going to be creating, these, slide decks or these associated resources to be able to make it work for their classrooms. So like, why not as a part of a greater adoption strategy, have them internalize the curriculum early on, make it right for the district, and then, you kind of got ahead of some of the adoption hurdles, the implementation hurdles that people are gonna potentially run into later down the road. I think it's a great thing for people to consider.
Yeah, for sure. No, I love that. I love everything you just said. All right. So so we and I want to highlight something that you said that I think gets very often overlooked, which is not only is this early group piloting or being the phase one implementation. I love that language switch. And by the way, I'm going to steal that forever and ever. That is now adopted in my language. Um, but it's important that we get feedback from them and that
Mm.
they feel like they have permission. Permission is this funny thing in schools where people
Ah,
think they need permission for things that they actually don't need permission for. When
yeah.
people ask me for permission all the time, I'm like, I don't know, I don't have power, but I do give you permission. Uh, so that people feel like they have permission to give feedback and to modify, right? To give feedback about what modifications
Mm.
do we need to have this work, right? This is an
Yeah,
important part of this group. They're not just like robotic implementers. These are
right.
feedback givers as well.
Right. And like, I mean, shouldn't they? Shouldn't they be giving either positive or negative feedback?
Yeah,
Like, well,
exactly.
I think
What
that
works, what doesn't work.
that's the key.
Yep.
What works and what doesn't, and what do we need to do to make this work? Or like, maybe it's just not going to, and we need to
Yeah.
try other things out at the same time.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Exactly. Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it's not static. It's gotta, if we're gonna make this right, like let's do
Yeah.
it right on the
Let's do
first
it.
time. We can't
I have a
just go along with emotions.
exactly. So I have a question for you. When you're rolling out district wide, how do you include school leaders in addition
Mm.
to teachers within this rollout?
Yeah. Ooh, how do you include school leaders in addition to the teachers? I mean, I think you start at the ground level. So, pre-implementation, you're having these conversations, you're including all of
Mm-hmm.
them. And when you say
Hmm.
school leaders, I'm thinking, let's get like precise on language. Instructional coaches and assistant principals, instructional leaders at the school,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
That's who we're
exactly.
talking
Yep.
about. Yeah.
Yes.
I always harp on you've got to come to the initial training. Like I think that that's one of the most impactful things that you can do. And it's so hard as a school leader, I know, to pull yourself away from all the other duties and all your teachers are in the room and they're learning at one time and you're probably got 100 other things on your to-do list, but
Hmm.
like just investing in your own knowledge of what are my teachers hearing, what do I need to know about the program in order to support their implementation, either doing that or investing in your own training. Like, a lot of curriculum, we offer this at Reading Horizons too. We offer a training just for leaders themselves. And it's abbreviated. It supports them with, our implementation rubrics. It supports them with our coaching rubric. So what are my look fors when I go
Look
into
for.
classrooms? What are my early implementation supports? And one thing I think that rubrics themselves, I really appreciate about our rubric is I mean, it's not meant to be evaluative, but it is meant to be sort of a coaching rubric, a coaching continuum. So, hey, if they are right here, what are the next steps? How do we move you from engaging to empowering? How do we move you from exploring to engaging? So those are I think those are the headlines. Attend the training or invest in your own training. Um, and then make sure that you know what are we looking for or how can we support or coach up our teachers early on.
One of
How does that
the
align
the
with what you've done before?
well, what I've seen, I'll give some non-examples where I've
Yeah.
helped to roll out initiatives and curriculum or just ways of teaching even. And when principals, so my instructional coaches are always plugged in. I've never known an instructional coach to not be plugged into what's happening.
Mhm.
But it's usually if there's someone that doesn't know kind of what's going on, it'll be maybe a principal or an assistant principal. And when they don't understand the new curriculum, the new change that is happening, they can inadvertently or accidentally create an environment that does not support that change. And I like to call that infertile
Mhm.
soil, right? So
Mhm.
we're trying to plant seeds here with this new curriculum in soil that does not allow the change to happen, and then you get kind of contention or now I need to hold you
Yeah.
accountable, right? We create this culture of us versus them,
Mhm.
and there are very simple ways, and one of them is for assistant principals and principals to understand, like truly understand the change and
Right.
how to support it, because sometimes school systems need to shift, right? If we're asking teachers to teach, I'm going to say
Yeah.
like for STEM, teach in a transdisciplinary way, we need to think about scheduling.
Scheduling.
Yeah,
Nope.
scheduling, right?
Yes.
If as the principal, I'm expecting you to teach math at 9 o'clock and reading at 10 o'clock, and there's this
That's not
initiative that
conducive.
says, yeah, it's not conducive, right? So, thinking, my school leaders listening, how can you create an environment that is
Wow.
conducive for this change to happen as well?
That's such a simple thought, and I didn't realize how them not understanding the environment that
Hmm.
the environment itself that breeds success would impact that later change. I've had conversations with districts who unfortunately didn't engage in the curriculum or the training ahead of time. And like you mentioned, scheduling ends up becoming a huge issue. They don't realize that we actually need this much time in order to have an effective block. And this is why the teachers may not be teaching this with a high level of integrity. And the teachers who are closing their doors and doing it quote unquote well are, the ones that are breaking the rules. But they're, we just haven't we created, we created systems, I guess, in a way that made them feel like they have to break the rules in order to teach with integrity. And
Exactly.
that's not what we want to do.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
So now where are we at the phase of we have the early adopters, right? And they've tried things,
Right.
and now I'm thinking through momentum, right? We're causing momentum, and we're wanting kind of a larger majority of folks to adopt. I have thoughts
Yeah.
about this, but I'm curious, what are when we're shifting into that larger majority of teachers to be adopting, what does that look like on your end?
Yeah. I think as a part of this large scale adoption strategy, it's all about like just knowledge for teachers.
Mhm.
Teachers want to know what they're getting themselves into. They want to know really clearly, what are my expectations? What am I being asked to do? And also when we talk about implementing curriculum, sometimes we have to talk about de-implementation. So what am I
Ooh.
putting on your plate? And what am I taking off of your plate, right? Like what am I asking you to do? And what are we saying? This is no longer a priority because sometimes when we're doing these systems of change, there are old systems that are not copacetic with these new systems, and teachers may believe that I have to try and do all of these things at the same time. Teachers may believe, for example, that I'm bringing on a curriculum that is doing science, that's aligned with the science of reading, that's aligned with structured literacy practices. And then they might still think in small groups, I should be doing guided reading or using my three queuing strategies or using this other program that is not as aligned with the science. And so if we don't say that explicitly, teachers may find themselves in that, like in this catch 22 of I don't have enough time. And that's the biggest issue. So I think knowledge of the programs, knowledge of what we're asking you to do and what we're not asking you to do, and then let's talk about adult learning theory. Adults learn in just one big chunk of information. Here you go. Now go do. They learn better in small chunks of information over time. So give them a little bit, give them a full training, follow up with additional coaching and support.
Mhm. And I think
That's
oh, sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, 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 no. That was it.
Okay, I'm gonna add on to I'm gonna yes and you.
Yeah.
So I think it's also during these whole staff trainings, right? We shifted from this like committed group to whole staff trainings, not only what to do, but why.
Mhm.
Like teachers like me, where I questioned I'm like, why are we doing this, guys?
Right.
And
Right.
if I did not understand why, or I did not own why it was happening, I resisted. I was like, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
I straight up wouldn't do it. And I know lots of teachers that do the same thing, and I'm like, I'm with you.
Yeah.
So I think those initial trainings, really hammering home
Why?
what to do and why we're doing it, and having that initial group, the phase one implementation group, share.
Sure. Yes. Yes. Like, and also like let's be really explicit. Let's be really transparent. How did we get here? Not just the
Yeah,
why too, but how did
yeah,
we get here? We
yeah,
listened to your feedback. We
mhm,
evaluated based off of your rubrics that we
yeah,
heard.
yeah,
And I love this idea of having the people who have already done it
mhm,
share out, and not just haphazardly, but
yeah,
intentionally.
intentionally.
Why don't we partner with your facilitators who are coming in to lead the training and
Mhm,
say, when can I use you as a teacher leader and an influencer within the district, within the school, to support me with this rollout?
mhm,
Because
exactly.
people listen to these influencers.
Mhm, exactly. Right. So this is where my tiered model of support comes in. And you and
Mm,
I talked about this, right? And this is how I think about supporting teachers, right? So this is a tier modeled for adults. This is not for children. So when
right.
I think about causing change or support in any way for teachers, I think about tier one support, which is whole group PD, right? We have now showed everyone what the change is, how to do it, and why we're doing it. And then some folks are going to go do that. They're going to be like,
Right.
yes, right? They just
Right.
need to know what to do and they will go do it. Some folks won't. Some
Yep.
folks need more, right? So after we've done this whole group support, off you go. We do kind of a school assessment. We're like, who is implementing, who is not, right? With
Right.
integrity.
Right.
Then we start to support tier two teachers and we say, okay, what small groups of teachers are not
Yes.
implementing with integrity? And I love that you intentionally use the word integrity and not fidelity. And I know that's
I
intentional.
hate I hate the F word.
Yeah, yeah, I do too. I do too. Yeah. Okay, good. So then, you might be like fifth grade. They're doing their own thing.
Hmm.
Um, right. So then we start to have small group support, right? Maybe in PLCs or grade level,
Right.
or even just new teachers. Maybe you start to see like, ooh, new teachers are all struggling with this, right? What small groups are having trouble with
Yeah.
implementation? And I want to encourage everyone, ask why. And I think about when I'm
Yes.
assessing root cause analysis, and you and I have talked about this, root cause analysis, why is the change not happening? Is it knowledge? They don't know what the curriculum is,
Right.
or literally like, even like what the different elements of reading are, right? Or is it
Right. Right.
a skill? Is it how to do it? Or is it a mindset issue? Because
Mm.
if we just keep hammering home, this is what you do, this is what you do, this is what you do, and it is a skill issue. They don't know. They know what to do. They don't know how to do it. We're
Right.
using a
We're
wrench when
misaligned.
we need a hammer, right? We're
Yeah.
literally using the wrong tool, and it's frustrating for everyone when we're not, addressing someone's actual needs.
Yeah. That's really cool. I geek out when you use this as a I guess as a metaphor
Mm-hmm.
because it makes sense. It just makes sense in the minds of teachers. This is your tier one instruction. Now this is your tier two instruction. And they may need, they need core plus more. They need additional supports, right? Um, and we may need to I mean, this is what teachers and district leaders are saying. The market is saying we want quote unquote flexible implementation options. They want to be able to say, we're going to have a tier one training for all of my teachers, but I also need to be able to say, this PLC really needs an additional, they need additional supports with this skill, or they need you to come in and show them what it looks like, or they just need you to come in and answer some questions. Like people, the teachers and school leaders know that their teachers have different needs, and we
Mm-hmm.
need to really tailor the ways that we support them with that need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
You
exactly
know
it.
what we haven't talked about is we've talked a lot about the schoolhouse. I we haven't talked about parents yet. I
Oh
think that parents
yeah.
could be a really cool part in this too. I as a school teacher, I used to say like, hey, we need three people on board. This is if you're not religious, that's okay, but like this is the Holy Trinity, quote unquote, which is your teachers, your students, and your families. Like if we can have everybody working together in the same direction on the same page, I think that we have the magic. Because when we have these tier one, we have these Title One nights rather, or we have, these back to school nights, parents are asking questions. They're like, how can I help my kid at home? What can I do when we have parent teacher conferences? I think that's an important part of the buy-in as well. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it's wildly important, and if I'm going to be really honest, it's not something that I specialize in, right? And I'm like, this is
Mm.
important. I share I share, and I'm like, this is important. How are you supporting them? And it's not. I really specialize in like really supporting teachers, right? How do we support
Teachers.
teachers? So I want to actually
Yeah.
throw this back to you.
Yeah.
How do you support parent family engagement?
Yeah. I can think of I can think of two ways. That's a good question. Two ways that currently I've been supporting parent and teacher or parent engagement, family engagement. One is just with really easy to digest parent resources that help them to understand what are my students learning and how can I help. Make it easy. for parents because at the same time you might need to like you might need to educate the parents at the same along the way. The second thing is just bring them in. And, parents are already kind of engaging with, they might do these Title One nights where they need to know what's happening in the schools. They get to know about, the different initiatives within the school. Bring in your curriculum, bring in your curriculum programs. Have them speak to your parents on behalf of, we just did this in Cleveland County Schools in North Carolina. We spoke to the parents, we engaged them and taught them a few games that they can play with their students at home to support these critical foundational literacy needs for kindergarten. What better time to support like parents than when they might be possibly the most engaged that they might ever be with their
Yep.
5-year-olds when they're sending their precious babies. They're graduating in, well, I don't know, 2036, 2046. And they're sending out their precious babies and their angels into the world. Like they're super engaged. Get them engaged and get them hooked from the get-go. And that's two ways that I can think of how you can
Yeah.
support parents.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah, and provide food.
And pizza, hello. We need
Yeah.
pizza and cookies.
I love that. Yeah. All right, good. So we want to engage the parents as well. I want to return back to the tiered support because I did not get to
Mm,
talk about tier 3, which
yes.
is what I consider that one-on-one coaching opportunity, right?
Mm,
So after we've addressed the small groups of folks to support what they need, right? Knowledge, skills, mindset. Now we're taking and usually this is an instructional coaching role, right? My instructional coaches,
yeah.
you are going in and saying, okay, these folks still are not implementing, and I need to ask myself why. Not
Mm,
what do I do, but why isn't it happening?
why?
And this is where my human-centered approach comes in. We need to be understanding there's a whole human there that is not bought into the change. And we want to ask
Mhm.
why, right? And one of the biggest things that can get in the way of us asking why is our shoulds. Well, they should be doing it. They should know it's best for
Mm,
kids, right? And
mhm.
so as my coaches that are listening, as you're thinking through, okay, I need to be asking why, be careful not to get stuck in the pit of shoulds.
Yeah,
Because it can really have us as coaches get stuck in supporting teachers and what they need.
yeah. When you were talking about the idea of tier three and supporting those tier three teachers with this one-on-one support, you know what it got me thinking about? How so many times we as teachers, we focus on pulling into small groups, the yellow group, the red group,
Mhm.
and we leave the green group behind. And I think that's when we think about how we can support like all teachers in implementation. What if we leveraged some of those green teachers as like your teacher student mentor? Like, what if we leverage some of those green teachers, did a little instructional coaching with them just to see what they're doing, bring in the instructional coaches, let them hear the type of feedback that we're providing, um, and now the instructional coach and the teacher leader can lead out to support or in support of the tier three implementers. What are your thoughts on that? I don't want to leave the green group behind because
Yeah,
so many times as students we don't think about our high flyers. They're
right.
they're doing it.
Right, right, right. Right. And so, and I think everyone deserves to grow, right?
Sure.
And so what I think I'm thinking about how can we leverage relationships and trust. And
Hmm.
what actually makes me think about is different models of coaching.
Hmm.
So thinking through, will it support this teacher to implement to see a model, right? A model in another classroom,
Right.
to see
Yeah.
something modeled in their classroom. And sometimes modeling is in the skill arena, not the will arena. So if
Right.
someone is
Yeah.
does understand how and what to do and is not bought into why, the
The
modeling does
model's not gonna make a
not, yeah,
difference.
modeling, right? And so how can we leverage those that are like really doing it?
Mm,
And it something to consider is what relationships do folks have? How much trust do they have with each other, right?
mhm.
Social capital and human capital, right? So social capital, right? Who has strong influence within the
Yeah.
schools? And just to think about how that can be uh how connections, right? So connections could be so powerful within that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I think about in terms of like thinking through how we can leverage those the integrity implementers. Like how can we utilize them?
Can you tag this one more time? You said it could be a skill, it could be will, or it could be, there was a
I
third
shifted
one.
between two models. It's skill versus will, which is one model, and then
Right.
there's knowledge, skill, and mindset.
That's right. Knowledge, skill, and mindset. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that one because you're so right. And mindset is such a challenging thing to change, especially when we're
Yeah.
talking about something so deeply personal
Mhm.
as teaching.
Mhm. And I think, one of the ways, I teach this all the time, and people don't realize how powerful this is. If we can be highly trained in listening, we can hear what's important to people. And then we can
Hmm.
create a mutual purpose around this change.
Yeah. This, I mean, that itself, now I'm thinking that reminds me of, man, when you're well read, I'm like, who said this? Because I think Elena Aguilar might have said something along those lines of like, it's very, I think that you two are very similar in this
Yeah.
idea of like, you can only influence people to do things that they value. And you can only
Hmm.
find out what people value by listening.
Hmm. Yep, that's
Mm,
exactly it. I love it.
I
Okay,
love
we
that.
we've got to wrap up. This has been such an amazing conversation. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I'm so glad we got to talk about this because this is beyond theory, right? I'm really passionate about bringing things from bridging from theory to action, right? Like how
Yeah,
does this look in schools? And so I love that you are actively doing this in schools in a way that empowers educators. So thank you so much for being here and sharing, all of your experience around this. Where, if folks
absolutely.
want to know more about you, what you do, Reading Horizons, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn is Sean Lindsey, MED. You can always find me on readinghorizons.com. We like to say at Reading Horizons, like we are where reading momentum begins. Wherever you find people learning to read is where you're going to find Reading Horizons. We're grounded in the science of reading. We've been doing this for 40 years. We're not new to this. We are true to this. So I mean, at the end of the day, that 40 years of experience gives us the knowledge of how do you effectively teach these evidence-based practices based in the science of reading. How do you make it easy for teachers to implement and students to understand? So I think that's where I want to leave you with. I'm Sean Lindsay, and peace out.
Yeah.